Welcome to Behind the Bar. It is day 5 of the Diddy criminal trial, and things are now underway. We have selected a jury of 12 people. There are 8 men on this jury, 4 women. It is racially diverse, and they are the people who are going to sit in judgment of Diddy as this case plays out. There's also 6 alternates in case any of those jurors have to be excused for some reason. You'll have 6 backups who are also following the trial and can sub in if need be. In court today, I want to go over a couple things. Diddy came into court wearing his usual outfit of his sweater and a collared shirt underneath. His family was also there in support, lots of his children. I believe his mother, Janice, was also there. And Diddy was seen at counsel table. I was wondering how this struck you, Jason, reading Bible scripture while things
Actually
were...
had a Bible in hand.
Had a Bible in hand. And this is one of the things that, many prisoners get their hands on Bibles. They sort of, find themselves renewed by being brought to justice in this way. But how do you think this plays? Sitting there, the jury is now impaneled, and he's there like a little choir boy reading the Bible.
I think it's hard to get into to the minds of any jury, any juror, and they can be surprising what they say after the trial sometimes. To me, it is such a transparent and cynical move by Diddy. We're going to convince the jury that this person, they're going to hear testimony about, even by Diddy's own admission, that he was one of the most sort of sexually deviant, and that's not a judgmental term, just deviant people that we've ever heard about. The things that he was engaged in, we'll talk about a couple of them today.
Or outside the norm.
Or outside the norm, and that's being quite kind. Yeah. That he all of a sudden, and by the way, is a mogul and has been involved in shootings and involved in a lot of different drug stuff. He's all of a sudden, after being caught and imprisoned and in a fight for his life, has found God. Now, that's quite possible.
Absolutely.
But to me, he's not going to testify, right? So that testimony is not going to be there. You've got to just leave it to the jury to infer what it will by the fact he's reading the Bible. It seems, again, so cynical and trying to pull the wool over the jury's eyes in just a way I just don't think it's going to be effective.
Yeah, look, we don't know what's in his heart, what is sincere and what is not. It struck me the same way. Very transparent, very cynical. It's one thing to dress appropriately, let your gray hair grow in. Some of those optics, I think, do become effective because you look maybe enfeebled, and it humanizes you a little bit. This was a bridge too far. But I want to get into, we are now into opening statements here. So the prosecution is stepping out to frame the entirety of the case and sort of give a roadmap of where they're going to prove these 5 counts against Diddy. How did that go, Jason?
So let's start with obviously prosecution starts with opening statements. Opening statements are not meant to argue the legality, not meant to argue guilt and innocence. It's simply to lay out a factual roadmap for what the jury is going to hear over the length of the prosecution's case. Here's how they started. They said, and I'm going to quote this: "To the public, he was Puff Daddy or Diddy, a cultural icon, a businessman, larger than life. But there was another side to him, a side that ran a criminal enterprise. He called himself the king and expected to be treated like one. He expected his inner circle to cater to his every desire, including his sexual desire. And his inner circle made sure he got everything he wanted." This is the prosecution's efforts to lay the groundwork for the fact that he was the mastermind of a criminal enterprise. That is really what's at stake here, not just the individual acts of illegal conduct with respect to prostitutes and transporting people across state lines, but the fact that he was the mastermind of a criminal enterprise, and that sort of sets the tone for everything that the jury is going to hear from that point forward.
I thought it was a brilliant way to encapsulate. Look, you have to puncture the celebrity a bit and say, this guy was a big guy. He was a music mogul. I'm sure you love some of his songs, but he had this entire other life where he's running a criminal enterprise and demanding to be called king. They're setting up those themes so that the jury cannot just be starstruck by Diddy. Diddy's a massive superstar in the same way that O.J. Simpson was, and Harvey Weinstein to a lesser extent in his trial. You have to bring them down to reality. And I thought the prosecution did a good job of saying, look, we know you're sitting here in front of a celebrity. They're acknowledging that this is a big trial. We know the publicity is out there, but this is a guy who also ran a criminal enterprise.
So then they went on to really paint Diddy as an unforgiving monster. And again, the defense has their opportunity. We'll talk about that, and they will have their opportunity to put on witnesses too, which will certainly counter some of what you've heard from the prosecution. But they really did paint him as really an unforgivable monster who perpetrated some awful acts on not just Cassie, but some others as well. They reference right off the top the beating video of Cassie, which is the centerpiece of their case. They told the jury that Cassie will testify that she was abused throughout the relationship, including being urinated on by prostitutes and having sex with men while Diddy watched. Obviously, as long as this was consensual, there's nothing illegal about it. But the prosecution also said they would hear that when Cassie finally said she'd had enough, finally went to Diddy and said, "I don't want to do this anymore," he brutally beat her, which is what you're seeing on the videotape. After the beating, Diddy allegedly demanded that she cover up the bruises, including a purple eye, a purple black eye, take ecstasy, and perform in another freak off right there. His appetite at that moment was not sated, and the fact that he had just beaten the snot out of her meant nothing to him. And this is what they said that you're going to hear testimony about, meant nothing to him, and he wanted her back in action.
Yeah, and it's purposeful what the prosecution is doing in pointing out the urination episode, or that alleged episode with the prostitute urinating on Cassie, and bringing up the beating, because they have to move away from just a consensual with non-consensual elements
Right.
relationship, right? The defense is going to do a good job, I anticipate, saying this relationship had some kink to it. And Diddy is not on trial for having sexual desires that are maybe outside the norm.
Right.
What he's on trial for, though, according to the prosecution, what they're going to hammer home is people don't consent to being beaten up and covering up their bruises. People don't necessarily consent to being urinated on, although that one is going to be sort of more questionable. There are various sexual things that go on of that nature.
But I think to that point,
the further you get
what
from
they're
that,
trying to do is say, we understand that he's going to argue that it was just outside the norm, and everybody, this CNC, this consensual non-consent, which is sort of in vogue these days. We understand that they're going to argue that. But let me tell you, once a woman gets beaten so badly that she's got to cover the bruises on her face with makeup, it's no longer consensual. That's not within the norm. And you're going to hear Cassie testify that that was not normal, and that was not something she had ever consented to. And in fact, what the prosecution say is, right when she said, "I don't want this anymore," that's when the beating got really ferocious. That's going to be the centerpiece of what they're saying about Cassie. They also indicated that another woman by the name of Nia would testify, who was Diddy's employee, and they said that she's going to testify how he forced himself on her sexually, snuck into her bed to penetrate her against her will. Again, he is not on trial for rape. They are simply trying to establish that this man is a monster capable of anything.
That's right. And to do so, as you said, Cassie is going to be front and center in this case, but she's not the first witness. The first witness, however, is related to that episode in 2016 at the Intercontinental Hotel. They brought up a man named Israel Flores, who was a security guard at the hotel when this whole incident occurred. He says that he was brought up, he went up to Diddy's room after hearing this commotion, saw Diddy in the robe that we've seen in that video, saw Cassie sort of cowering with the bruises.
Yeah, she had a hoodie sort of pulled down over her face, but he could nevertheless see the bruising.
He could see what went on. He was in there in his capacity as a security guard, though. So there was a commotion. He had other guests that he was concerned about. There had been a vase that was broken. You can see in the video, Diddy is throwing this vase. It had shattered. The security guard says, he said, "You're going to be responsible for that. This is a hotel. Whatever you guys are doing needs to be taken back to the bedroom." It doesn't sound like he was acting as a law enforcement officer to necessarily intervene in what happened and maybe get Cassie to safety. He was there to say, "You guys can't do this in a hotel."
And let's just sort of take account of what we have here. We have one of the biggest stars in the world and a security guard for the hotel who is called up to his room to say, like, basically, stop doing this in the public, bring it into your room, which is an awful thing to have said, as opposed to, like, trying to intervene to protect her. But you can just, this is the treatment that celebrities get all the time. It's very intimidating for a hotel security guard to go up and confront Diddy.
Yes.
And so Diddy tries to handle it. Tell him how Diddy tries to handle it.
That's right. According to this security guard, Diddy had a handful of cash in his hand and offered it to the security guard. Now, Diddy's defense then cross-examined this man and said, "Well, you said that he was responsible for this vase," intimating that maybe the handful of cash was to pay for the vase and move on. On redirect, which is to rehabilitate their witness, the prosecution stood up and said, "Well, what did he say when he had the handful of cash?" At which point, Israel Flores said that he wanted no one to learn of what went on here. So then it sounds like they've really crystallized that this was a bribe offer to cover up what had transpired in that hotel room and in the hallway.
Again, nothing illegal about offering a hotel security guard hush money to not talk about something that he saw. That is completely illegal. But it again just paints this picture. They're creating the entire image of Diddy as a monster capable of beating the hell out of a woman who simply doesn't want to engage in his sex acts anymore. And number two, willing to pay people off to keep it quiet. This is not just somebody, a monster capable of monstrous things, but somebody capable of running a criminal enterprise, of throwing money around as necessary to get what he wants. And this is the kind of thing that they're going to try and point out throughout the course of the prosecution.
And to that point, the security guard also testified that he came back to work a few days later. The footage was nowhere to be found,
Yes.
he said. He had recorded some of it on his iPhone. There were some questions about whether the nature of the footage. Remember, the CNN footage that people have seen, some say it looks sped up. It looks like it's not necessarily, it looks potentially edited in some way. He described that these security cameras are motion sensitive. The way they're filming is not necessarily a direct image of reality, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was edited in any falsifiable way.
Right. So let's move on to the defense's case. We heard opening statements from Tenny Garagos, the one of the counsel for Diddy. She stood up and said, "Look, this is about voluntary choices that adults make in a consensual relationships." Again, to your point, trying to establish this was consensual. She said, quote, "You may know of his love for baby oil," by way of example, the thing that has maybe permeated the sort of public consciousness more than anything else, that he's had this 1,000 bottles of baby oil. She says, "This is weird. It's strange. However, is that a federal crime? No," she answers her own question. She says that what you're going to see in this video is indefensible. It's horrible, the Cassie video. It's dehumanizing. It's violent. However, she went on to say that while the video may be evidence of domestic violence, that's not what he's on trial for. It is not evidence of sex trafficking, which is what he is being charged with. They went on to say that she wrapped up her testimony by telling the jury that the accusers weren't forced into sexual relationships and were willing participants who could have left at any time, directly contradicting, obviously, what the prosecution has said you're going to see you're seeing in the Cassie video, which is non-consensual relationship at that moment. Tenny Garagos also suggested to the jury that those who will testify against Combs have a certain motive. For many of them, the answer is simple. Money, she said. This is all about money. So she's trying to diminish the witnesses you're going to hear, saying what they really want has to do with these civil suits and the money that could come from Diddy.
And listen, there's a certain type of power in the way that she framed this case as well. Domestic violence is not what he's on trial for. That is a state offense. These are federal crimes of sex trafficking people across state lines. That's why this is in federal court. I thought she did a great job of redirecting the attention on that and refocusing the jury on what we're actually faced with, sort of convicting Diddy of. The other thing is, I think that Tenny Garagos, is pretty effectively sort of laying the groundwork of don't let the government intrude in your private affairs. I think that's something that will resonate with some jurors, that, look, he had an active sexual life. We all have our bedroom doors, and trying to get into the hearts and minds of the jurors to think, would you really want the government worrying about everything you did in your bedroom? I thought that was fairly effective.
I did too. I thought that was pretty good. She's very talented. I don't think many of us were very familiar with her before this trial started. We're obviously very familiar with her father, one of the great
criminal defense
attorneys for celebrities, especially that's ever been. But nevertheless, I thought that she did basically what we can see in the transcript. We can't watch the trial live. She's doing a very effective job. The evidence is tough, right? Yep. I'd like to, as we get into this trial and do this more and more, sort of figure out who won the day. Anytime the prosecution's going to have their opening statements followed by their witnesses, they're going to win the day. They're going to have a more effective day. Right. If they don't, they're really in trouble. But Tenny Garagos, at this point, the defense is simply
trying to survive this opening case and the opening day.
And I've sat in trials before, civil trials, where the other side's putting on their case, and it's hard to watch. Yeah. You're having a parade of witnesses who are influencing the jury in one way, and all you can do is wait and suffer through it until you have your chance to counter these points. Hopefully for Diddy's side, that will happen.
I want to ask you one more point. She brought up money. And Cassie famously lit the fuse on all of this by filing that bombshell civil lawsuit against Diddy, which she subsequently withdrew per a settlement. What Tenny Garagos did effectively, and not directly about Cassie, was plant the seed in everyone's mind that a lot of this is just about shaking Diddy down for money. He's a man worth 9 figures. And she's even planting that seed about Cassie, even though she's not saying Cassie withdrew her claims for money. That's in everyone's mind. That was reported.
That was. The difficulty that Cassie has is she's already got the settlement. Yet she's still going forward risking a lot as a pregnant woman going through this, getting up on the stand to testify what a horrific man this is. There's no there's no future monetary value to Cassie of this at all. I mean,
Oh, interesting. How does that cut? She already got her check, so she just wants to spike the football on his head.
It's sort of like somebody who has, no matter what I guess, some sort of immunity from prosecution. They already have the immunity.
Right.
They're going to go forward and testify anyways. It almost makes her more believable in a sense. But to your point, she got her money already. That was a private settlement that we didn't really know much about. This video leaking was everything. It changed the narrative. He would not be on trial but for this video leaking. I don't know. I think that she's very hard to cross. I just think given that videotape and given how much sympathy there must be for her, she's very hard to cross.
We'll know in a few days.
We will. All right. So we got a few questions. Derek, do you think Diddy will retaliate against those who are against him if he's found not guilty? He's shown a degree of sort of at least professional retaliation. There's allegations of professional retaliations against those people who don't toe his line.
Look, if he is found not guilty, he should quietly resume his life with his millions of dollars. If any acts of vindictiveness, he's really rolling the dice. So I would hope not.
Yeah. Shar Powell asks, how do we know that he's actually reading the Bible? We don't. It says Bible on the front of it. It says Holy Bible on the front of it. So we assume that he doesn't have it sort of like comic books in there, I guess.
And he may be born again. He's been spending some time in prison. It does happen, but I thought the move will backfire.
Yeah. And here, Andre, you hit the nail right in the head. I think that Diddy's sexual interests just make him a sick person, but that's not the same as that's not what he's being accused of. That's the entire objective for the prosecution here. And their difficulty is they've got to bridge that gap between a person with strange sexual tastes, between that and is that making him a criminal?
Yeah, and I love this. Lee Davis said consequences are still needed even if he's repented. So even if he is born again and wants to be rid of his sins, that doesn't mean that you don't necessarily pay a price in a legal sense.
And if he is found not guilty, he will still suffer. Obviously, it would be a huge relief for him, and he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
But his professional career is over.
His professional career is I never want to say over because people come back from stuff like R. Kelly's music sells,
Fair.
but he will still have a ton of legal debt in terms of lawyers' fees, but also what he's going to have to pay out in civil settlements.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we will see you again tomorrow. This is going to be great. It's just a tremendous amount of interesting testimony, so we'll keep you posted.
Stay tuned.